That's what you call fate. It was written by the gods that was supposed to die, and whether I saved him or not, he would die. That's what happened here. No matter what I plead or what I say, nothing will affect the final decision for the jurors. He signaled with his hand at the people, who sat together in a huddle for their bribe or threatened by the great Lord Kali. He mocked and spat, while his muscles rippled and strained, and his scars glinted under the remnants of the dim fire lamps. I don't know if I have lived a full life, but I have seen enough evil in this world to know that we need a change. Boring speech, Kali muttered. Kill him, he ordered the guards. With the chains that were wrapped around his skin, he was pulled down by the Nagas. In front of him, Draupadi grew restless and tried to move away from Martanja, but he didn't let her go. Kalki knelt down, and the very skies seemed bitter. He prayed to Lord Vishnu as he heard the thundering sounds of the axe-wielder's footsteps. The man who was coming with the weapon of his death. You don't simply mean to kill him here? Mansa protested. This is outrageous. Why aren't the other council members speaking against the biases held by Kali? But no one spoke. Kalki could almost see their tails tucked in between their legs. Kalki's head was put on an anvil-like structure, with his neck craned forward so that the axe could make a clean sweep. The axe was placed gently a few times over his skin, in preparation for the final swing. He could see his life flash in front of him, and then, the axe came from above, going furiously towards his neck. Before it stopped, Kalki opened his eyes, heart beating, as he looked up and saw the axeman was watching the skies, and even Draupadi had stopped fighting and was looking up. In the middle of the skies, almost covered by dark clouds, Kalki could see a swerving bird making its way towards them. The entire public watched in awe, and as Kalki's eyes focused, he realized it was larger than any bird he had ever seen. It was a chariot, and it was coming this way. But that wasn't the most surprising part about the entire scene. It was that the chariot was held not by horses, but rather two long wings on its side. Usually these rotating, wing-like structures were used to attack a large number of enemies on the ground. Instead, here it was being used to fly the chariot. And then he saw his friends, none other than Arjun at the front, with Bala and Kripa at the back, holding a bow, an arrow and spear respectively. And the arrow was not for him. It was directed towards the Naga that was holding Kalki by the chains. It hit the skull of the Naga, as he fell back, dying on the spot. The chariot maneuvered in the air as another arrow was shot from it to another Naga. The chains that bound Kalki were loosened and he felt stronger, so he pulled the third Naga and punched him hard. With no one to hold him anymore, he began to break the chains, but was unsuccessful. His eyes went across to the suspended chariot that had been propelled by Soma, the telltale blue fumes coming out from the back, crackling with energy. A ladder was thrown down, which Kalki grabbed onto. And that was the time Kalki realized that Martanja was running towards him at full speed. Kill him. Kali stood up from his seat and bring that beauty to me. Arrows were shot at the chariot, but it was not affected. One was able to break its front, but it didn't crash. Though now, as Kalki was holding the edge of the ladder, he realized Martanja was close. Come up fast. The Soma won't let it last in the air forever, yelled Arjun from the inside of the chariot. How did you even do it? Kalki shouted back, and also, for the love of gods, move forward. Kripa calls it a Vimana, fueled by Soma. We just had to burn the stones inside the chariot, leaving a small opening for them to release their power. We just had to find a chariot that had no horse. And also, yes, we intend to move. Arjun grinned, but we aren't able to. Kalki couldn't help but grin. The chains were pulling the chariot down. Perhaps he realized he had to get rid of the heavy metal that was still attached to his body. I have to go back down. The chariot won't move otherwise. Wait here for a moment. Kalki fell back on the ground and began to look for a weapon on the Naga. And as he came forward towards the dead Naga, grabbing its axe, Martanja appeared. Village boy, scowled the Rakshas chief. What kind of magic is this? Kalki didn't know how to explain it to him. But then there was no room for explanation as Martanja came forward with a twisted blade that had many conical edges to it. He began to thump it across Kalki's axe repeatedly. Kalki somersaulted at the back. The chains were killing him and his energy. The large blade came forward against Kalki's face as he turned around. With a swift movement, he hit the axe against Martanja's knees. Martanja fell on his feet, but he stood up again, wiping the blood off it. It was so quick that Kalki couldn't wrap his head around it. I need to use my weakness as my strength. With the use of the chains, He began to move it so rapidly that the chain gathered a tremendous amount of momentum. And then he directed those chains across Martanja's face. With a quick sweep, they smacked him in his face. He fell back and collapsed on the floor. Kalki then used the axe and began to smash it against the iron chains. And he heard Kali scream, "Don't let him leave." Kalki turned to see that all the council judges and the jury had stood up. Even the citizens were hooting, surprised and elated by such commotion and entertainment. Kalki broke the first part of his chain, and then another, before stepping out of his ankle manacles. But he could see Martanja was struggling to get up. "Now take me." Kalki's gaze swept down, and he realized it was Durukti who had reached out to him. "Please, take me." Kalki, for a moment, thought about the tyranny of Kali, and how he would be protecting her from his wrath by taking her. But then, she was the reason Lakshmi had died, along with all the village folks from Shambhala. She was the reason he was here. But he had to stop blaming her. Kalki shook his head. "If there is one person who can help Kali right now, it is you. Save him and change him if you can. You can't leave me here. Please," she begged, her hands folded together. "He'll kill me or do something worse. I don't know. I don't know what he will do." Kalki grabbed her face and looked directly at her. "I will be back. Thank you for everything." He kissed her on the cheek and then sprinted towards the ladder, grabbing for it. He didn't have the time to see Durukti's face, and when he turned around, he saw Martanja was reaching out for the ladder. The chariot maneuvered forward, leaving the area over the podium. With a quick, fleeting jump, Martanja lurched from the podium towards the ladder. His jump was so high that he was able to grab the edge of the ladder. This led the chariot to tilt violently, but it still moved, and it escaped the zone where the trial had been taking place, making for the north. Kalki was climbing on top, but Martanja was faster. With one hand over the rope, he grabbed Kalki's feet and tried to dislodge him. Kalki decided to kick him, but it didn't work. He clutched his feet and sunk his serrated nails into Kalki's already bruised ankle. Kalki moaned in pain, and with his remaining strength, he pushed him down. Luckily, the flying chariot had been going over a tall building, and Martanja fell on that, rolling over. Kalki and Martanja shared a glance of contempt. While he stayed there with his weapon come up, Arjun called. Kalki gritted his teeth. "I have to end this. Throw me a weapon." "Why? Just throw it." Kalki looked up and saw Arjun was tossing a sword. Kalki grabbed it. It was sheathed so the blade didn't slice through his hand. "Hold it properly. Let the chariot stay here. Rein it somewhere." "Rein it?" Arjun's voice squeaked. "In what world does this look like something that can be reined? Where do you plan to go?" Kalki pursed his lips. "I plan to end this." Arjun shook his head in defiance, but Kalki jumped from the ladder, and he dived to the top surface of the mud building, where Martanja was standing. Kalki rolled over the ground and unsheathed his sword, his eyes down, hair dangling over his temples. He tossed the sheath away, as he came forward with Martanja charging at him as well. "What made you return, coward?" Martanja grinned. His teeth had grown dark and his eyes had a certain dark energy. "Unlike the last time, when he would get nervous even at the sight of Durukti." "You killed my people." "I did. That wench told me to." She said to stop, but you didn't." Martanja shrugged. "I was doing my duty, boy. Wouldn't you have? My men have their own minds as well. You can't blame them for it." He instantly attacked Kalki. Kalki deflected it with his sword. Martanja stepped back, his feet moving adroitly. "And also, if I could go back now, I would rape and murder everyone in that bloody village to get what was in their soma. I can see it's infecting your mind." Kalki came forward and hit the blade against his blade, but it didn't help. "He was quick." "It isn't. It makes me stronger," Martanja said, as he finally leaped forward attacking Kalki. But Kalki knew where to stop, and he deflected it again. The sound of clashing metal roared in the sweeping wind as Martanja tried to overpower Kalki with his sword, until Kalki kneed him. Martanja fell back, toppling over at the back. Kalki came forward and again tried to plunge his sword inside Martanja, but it didn't stop him, and he grabbed the sword by his hand. "As you can see, I'm not ordinary anymore." Clearly, Kalki pulled back the sword while Martanja licked the blood on his hand. "My ancestors believed that blood held a vital component of nutrients that is supposed to egg on a warrior. Is that why they look so grotesque themselves?" Kalki grinned, trying to be funny. "Won't help you to escape this reality. You are stuck with me here." Kalki swung his sword with his feet parted. "You are wrong. You are stuck with me. And then Kalki came forward, advancing towards Martanja. He was able to stab him deep inside his skin, and at that moment Martanja grabbed him from the back, his nails digging into him. As they both fell from the edge of the building, Kalki could feel the fast wind whipping against his hair. As he finally realized he had fallen over a shack, he watched Martanja, who was already standing up by then, and was moving away from Kalki, staggering over the ground, dragging his hafted feet. Scowling and mumbling to himself, Kalki came onto his feet, each joint of his body hurting. He couldn't believe how bad it hurt. Kalki rounded off and realized, his blurry vision returning back to focus, that Martanja had his sword embedded in his body. He was unable to walk properly and was grabbing attention of the citizens, who were watching him with disgust and contempt. Martanja was perhaps making his way back to his fort to be healed. Not again. Kalki looked at the weapon merchant whose shop he had destroyed. I apologize, friend, he said to the man who frowned at him, and then Kalki's eyes fell on the bow, an arrow made of simple bamboo, but blood-tainted. It was not similar to the one he had used in his dreams with Lord Raghav, but it was quite similar to the ones that were made during the Battle of Shambhala. Can I use it? The merchant guffawed at that. Kalki didn't really care, since he went for the bow and strung the arrow to it. He perched on the side of the road, his feet firmly planted, his arm was straight, and his one eye was closed. He took a deep breath, calming his senses, and with a slow chant to Lord Vishnu, Kalki let the arrow loose. It went straight, hitting Martanja on the skull, breaking through his scalp, and finally making him collapse. Kalki tried to walk as fast as his wounds would permit him to see Martanja, who was lying near the gutter, his blood flowing over his mouth, eyes lifeless. The weak moonlight over the cesspool that had been created by the events of the night. Taking a deep breath, Kalki realized he had won for the first time. Mansa hadn't cried the day her brother died. They had promised no matter what happened to each other, they wouldn't shed tears. They'd be strong and they'd fight back, and Mansa had been doing that ever since Vasuki's assassination. It was a clear plot by Kali, in which he had been assisted by Kuvera and Vedanta. But now, after what she had witnessed yesterday, not the suspended machine but the submissive nature of the Yaksh and Manav king, she was certain of one thing. They were afraid of speaking out against Kali, as if they knew what he was capable of. They didn't want to speak against him in front of him, but Mansa knew they might be plotting to kill him the first chance they got. Mansa was callous about apprehending the prisoner, that village boy. It was her way of showing she wouldn't take domination from Kali. Lying down meekly, she didn't care who the prisoner was. Clearly, though, he was important to Kali, and that intrigued Mansa more than the mundane court proceedings. She knew she had to do something about Kali, but perhaps she has to take Kuvera and Vedanta on her side. The problem was, Kuvera, no matter what, wouldn't even talk to Mansa properly, let alone side with her. The battle between the Yakshs and the Nagas was ancient, going back several hundred years. There was no start to why they hated each other, but Kuvera had done a spiteful thing to Mansa's tribe by stealing their money, which the tribe valued the most. Mansa was sitting on the pedestal, a rope spooling over the ground while shadows formed over the walls. Mansa knew that Vasuki's death would mean most of the nobles in Nagpuri would be fighting over the chief status. She had to return and fight for Vasuki's honor. Should she fight, or should she take revenge? It was most confusing. Mansa rested her functioning hand over her temple, thoughtfully musing, when she heard a sound. It was a falling dust and bricks. Her eyes darted, hand whipping towards the dagger that she had sheathed from her belt, pointing it towards the enemy, who had appeared from the window. Lanky and slender in posture, the figure was familiar by the shawl that concealed the face and her telltale silver hair. It was none other than her spy and assassin, Padma. The silver hair was knotted on top, and a pouch sagged from her girdle where she kept all her antique currencies. She had sharp daggers sheathed and hanging from her waist and thighs. You could have sent me a note to inform me that you were coming. You didn't have to hide and enter, darling. Mansa smiled weakly at Padma. I'm practicing. For what, is the question. Padma was a determined girl, reminding Mansa about herself when she was young and keen to be a warrior. Unlike the Rakshas, who tamed their women, the Nagas had their equality priorities straight. They believed women should learn warfare as much as men. But Mansa, regardless of her zesty attitude, was left behind because of her handicap. Mansa sighed, realizing Padma was in angst. What is wrong? I was there yesterday. At the trial, Padma said, I didn't see you. You shouldn't be seen with that hair of yours anywhere, said Mansa, pointing to her eccentric hair. I was the one steering the chariot, she said. The chariot was a deft presentation of science and magic. She still could not understand how it was possible. But Padma, by the looks of it, had no intention of speaking about it. I know it was all very shocking and nice, but that's not my concern. I want you to know that I have done what you asked of me. Padma said. What? I burnt down Kali's lair, the one where he holds the herbs. Mansa stood up, elated by Padma's words. She wanted to hug the urchin, but then she was too dirty for it. Dear me. Well done, darling. She had heard that after the trial and the mishap, Kali's anger had grown worse when he realized something had gone amiss in the other side of the city, which he held dear. It wasn't clear, but his steps were brisk and he escaped rather than discussing much about the turbulence. Vedanta and Kuvera talked to each other, and while Mansa eyed them, Kuvera turned back, and he didn't have his annoying, triumphant smirk anymore. He was frowning, and he was afraid. No matter how much she despised Kali, who had become sullen and ugly, she would congratulate him for taming Kuvera properly, but they were not herbs. They were stones, she said, arching her brows, now walking thoughtfully. Blue in color, just like a mani or a sapphire nagmani. What is that? Powerful gifted stones by Lord Shesha. Mansa said. They were hardly ever found by our people, and the one we did find is kept safely in our temple. Padma shook her head as if her thoughts had muddled. I don't know about all of that. I just thought of telling you I did my duty for more gold coins. I brought them. Mansa reached for a pouch when Padma's voice interjected her. No, I don't want any fancy coins anymore. I want something else. Mansa swiveled her head. Yes, dear. I want to know what Vedanta holds most dear. Mansa stayed still, contemplating. Padma did all of this for a reason. She was after Vedanta. She didn't reveal it then, and even now her implication was far from direct. And what do you intend to do with it then? Mansa gently prodded. That's my concern. She remained impassive. He could send off Padma, and if successful, he could cripple Vedanta just like she had done earlier. All right, Mansa nodded. Her name is Urvashi. His only daughter. Padma smiled back at Mansa before leaving by the window. The smile was of acknowledgement. She didn't care to listen about the plans, and by the gods, if she succeeded, Mansa would have one less headache. If she didn't, Mansa would have to find another spy for herself. Mansa had been summoned for the council meeting late at night. It was odd that her sleeping hours were replaced by working hours, but with 2 Naga soldiers on her side, she proceeded to the chambers where the meetings usually took place in the government building. Mansa realized as the doors were opened that the entire place, though lit by fire torches, had not a soul. Surprised, she walked further ahead where the slab of rock used as a table was placed. It was empty, completely isolated. What was going on here? And that was when she turned over to find her 2 guards with swords were plunged into their hearts and their throats ripped out. It was so sudden that Mansa didn't have the time reconcile herself with the sight of horror slipping over her robes and staggering over the floor as she realized that the killers of her men were none other than the 2 humans who had been forgiven at the trial and asked to serve in King Vedanta's army. This was another ploy, and then one of the Manas shot a dagger across the room towards Mansa. Realizing she had nowhere to go and nowhere safe to hide, she put her hand in front of her, trying to block the eventual annihilation, but nothing happened. The soldiers were puzzled. As Mansa opened her eye watching them, she realized the dagger had stuck into her limp hand, the one without any nerves in it. Instantly, Mansa pulled out the dagger from her hand and threw it back, this time sliding it into the Manav's head with ease. The other one came charging at her, yelling as loud as he could, but Mansa rolled over, confusing the soldier. She pulled out her snake-hilt dagger and sliced the soldier's knee. He fell on his knees, and then Mansa stabbed the soldier in his back. Twisting hard, Mansa stood up, letting her heartbeat calm down as she casually made her way outside the gates. She stood in the ornate corridor watching the other end of the corridor where Koko, Vikoko, and a few other Manav soldiers stood, trying their best to ensure she did not escape this encounter alive. Kali was trying his best to kill her. Perhaps it was about the trial and how Mansa had defied him at every stance. He wanted her to act like Kuvera and Vedanta, servile and submissive, but she wouldn't budge. Slowly in the shadows she glided away from the corridor, moving to the exit. While Koko and Vikoko would have realized by now that she had defeated her assassins, they wouldn't realize she knew the alternate ways out of this building as well. But as she came to the path that led to the different exit for the building, she saw it was locked. Just then she heard the rapid footsteps of the soldiers on the floor above, probably spreading out to look for her. She knew she had to do something. She reached for the window concealed by thick purple curtains. She touched the edges and looked down. It was a beautiful sight of Indragarh, heavily guarded and patrolled by her own men. She looked down and could see the undulating waves on a water body's surface. She's here. A soldier called out, "Oh, by the heavens and hells." Mansa shoved herself down the window. She splashed down into the water like a heavy sack of grains. For a moment her body felt helpless, her view blocked by weeds and fishes, her eyes burning in the filthy water, until she pulled her head out of the water. Gasping for breath, she began to swim, realizing Coco and Vikoko hadn't stopped there. They shot arrows wrapped with oiled cloth that they lit and shot into the water. One of them fell close to Mansa, but she avoided it and swam Avasi as quiet as possible. Reaching for the shore, she rested against the shore, her hair weighed down by the greasy and dirty water. She knew she couldn't stay here. The best option was to run, and run where she would be safe. Mansa knew that threatening Kali and defying him would have logically led to this, but she never knew he would have the guts to do it in the open. He was a changed man, and for the worse. Back at her city Nagpuri, she didn't even know how things were. She had been away for a while now. She had left her trusted cousin Kadru back there to look over things. "I hope everything is still all right there." Many out there that hated her, but many loved her too. She knew what she had to do now. As she panted for breath, a frown contorting her face, she would return again to Indragarh, and this time she wouldn't come back alone.